Dr. Craig Jolquist, and I wanted to say something about Enchantvale, our online community for visionaries, dreamers, intuitives, and creative people, and why I put it together. So, I've been wondering for some years, as I've worked in higher ed, done psychotherapy, earned PhDs, I've been wondering what would it look like to gather together such people in one space. So I decided to try it. What if we took people from very diverse backgrounds, abilities? What if we brought them all together for some conversation around how imagination and inspiration can change the world? I've actually collected many examples of this over the years and shared them. It's one of the sources of what I call enchantivism, telling the kinds of story and performing the kinds of creative acts and doing the kinds of art, photography, and film that make real change in the world. Not by pushing, not by arguing, not by protesting, although those all have a place, but through inspiration, by offering a look at how things could be. We so much underestimate the power of that. So what if we created a space that was in some ways an alternative kind of social media? So it would have some of that functionality built into it. So in Enchantvale, you can post comments, respond to discussions, you can post videos, you can chat, you can see where members are geographically, and if any are near you, in case you want to meet up with them or not, you can turn that functionality off as well. Online live sessions, all kinds of things going on. And I want to eventually install classes on various topics related to inspiration, making change in the world. So rubricizing, by contrast, is a word that Abraham Maslow came up with after he had had a taste of the academic life. He worked as a professor for a while, and he noticed that there was a tendency in higher ed to put everything into conceptual boxes and to proceduralize things to death. He would have been appalled by where that has gone these days. I've known a number of instructors who teach all kinds of fascinating things: eco-spirituality, mindfulness, how to interpret symbols symbolically, how to interpret dream symbols, spiritual studies, wisdom studies of different kinds, you name it. The deep stuff, right? The deep stuff. Who have left higher ed because they can't stand the boxes and the categories and the learning outcomes, which I can tell you as both an administrator and a teacher of 20 years experience, keep getting worse and worse, at least in the States. So part of why I'm doing this is I wanted to provide a sort of haven or learning organization for those instructors, as well as for people who might have been students at one time or weren't really interested in students or in being students or anything academic, and just wanted to learn the deep stuff without having to pay tuition or get grades, right? Get graded. So that's another reason I put this together. Yet another reason is as an alternative to the kinds of social media we have these days. Oh my God. Sometimes when I get out of TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or what have you, I feel like I need a shower. The tide of emotional immaturity, of chaos, of abuse, of sheer insanity is absolutely appalling because these platforms aren't regulated. So it takes a certain amount of bravery to say anything at all on them because the attacks start quickly piling up. So I thought, what if we build a platform that had some of the functionality, a lot of the functionality of social media built into it, but it was actually monitored. So in Enchantvale, no abuse allowed, no haranguing people, no missionizing, none of that stuff. We're going to keep all of that out. Narcissistic showboating and attacking, none of it. So that's another reason. Also, I am writing fiction steadily. I have been for the last maybe 10 years or so. And I like to write hopeful science fiction with a touch of fantasy mixed in and a little magical realism. So the overall term is speculative fiction. I love that stuff. I've been reading it my whole life. And then I got some training in how to write it because it's very different from writing nonfiction. So I've got two collections going, or actually a collection and a novel more accurately. So at my website, chalkwist.com/fiction, is a collection of free stories and fables called Tales of Terrania Rising. And they chart the long struggle, I call it in the book the long adventure, of human beings moving, fighting, groping toward more consciousness and maturity and responsibility as a species. There's a term that Gordon R. Dixon used long ago. He called it full spectrum humanity. And what does the ethical, responsible human look like? And so, you know, we can probably all name individual examples of that, but what would an entire society of such people look like? I don't know about you, but I think we can build it. The obstacles are huge, but there's no reason that we can't do it. We've done hard things as a species. So that is what I give the name Terrania to. Not utopia, because I don't think we're capable of that, given the limitations of human nature. But I think we're capable of making a good society. So in the stories, I look at what it takes to build it and what it might look like. And I bring in mythologies from many different lands and cultures. Now, I do all this as independently published. And one of the reasons is so that other people can play with the characters and the settings and the realms of Terrania without worrying about running into things like copyright and trademark violations. So I want other people to play with. I want other people to enter the assembling Terrania cycle and say, oh, I've got a bunch of myths from how I grew up in my culture. And here's where we could work them into some storytelling. So there's a lot of people doing that now, by the way. An obvious example is Neil Gaiman, but there are people from many different cultural backgrounds turning their old stories into fiction, and really inspiring fiction too. Doing this as a form of validation of their own cultural background and the values that are there. So why not just have a big party around all this that's ongoing? So that's another reason for this. There are spaces in Enchantvale that are dedicated to this activity. Also, we desperately need to reimagine our governing institutions and organizations, and not just government itself, but finance, education, healthcare, and you name it. There are all kinds of things that need reimagining. And my idea is that if we can do that in a way that preserves the values that we use to to justify these organizations and have appealed to, but actually live them for real and move the stories forward, what might that look like? So as an example of this, I wrote a blog not too long ago on what was the title? Let's repair the crack in the Liberty Bell. And so I look at that crack as a citizen of the U.S. whose ancestors got here in 1630, I think it was, before there was a U.S. I look at that crack in the Liberty Bell as an emblem or a metaphor or a symbol in the national soul. Our soul is split, our heart is split. And you can see that in the intense polarization of our politics. How can we mend that? We need new stories around that, new imaginings that'll bring us together. And there are other spaces for other similar efforts. There's one on place, nature, and earth. There's a space for reimagining religion. What might a non-patriarchal, a post-patriarchal, non-hierarchical, in other words, without all these authority structures of clerics telling us what to do, what might that kind of religion look like? A religion based more in imagination and ceremony than in what we're used to. So what might we imagine there? That's another reason for building this. So I hope this sounds interesting to you. If nothing else, it could be a place to hang out that's free from a lot of the static and nonsense that you find in social media. And also as a source for not just good news, because there's good news stations out there. You can pull them up on the internet. But not just good news, but uplifting news. Uplifting ideas and events and images and people. and I want to keep that lighthouse going too. So if this sounds good to you, go ahead and sign up. But if you're still on the fence about it or you have some questions, then for sure just reach out to me and ask, and I'll be glad to converse with you about this. So I'll leave you with the thought that often inspires me, and it's something that comes from the Lord of the Rings. And Tolkien said that he believed it was the wisest thing said in the whole series. It was spoken by Elrond. Such is the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do them because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere.